shared how they would get into the middle of the road trying to commit suicide. Elders and deacons who had children who actually did die from HIV/AIDS. A little difficult to share. But on the whole, medical conditions are not that difficult, not that too embarrassing to share. So our problem, in terms of wanting or desiring or feeling we can share, comes when a child or a spouse makes choices, and those choices totally throw us out of balance. I will share this in two parts. Part one, I will seek to pinpoint areas in which we would find ourselves being too hard-pressed or being tempted not to share with anyone because we find it too embarrassing to do so. In part two, I will lead us in seeking to address how to overcome our embarrassment and hopefully, eventually to share with someone we can trust. Let me begin with an illustration of an embarrassing situation. The pastor in our estate, I now live with my beautiful wife Noel in a river, and this post was actually forwarded to me by Noel. And you can see, those of you who knew Noel, she can be she can be more naughty than you think. A farmer was sitting in a neighborhood bar getting drunk. A man came in and asked the farmer, "Hey, why are you sitting here on this beautiful day getting drunk?" The farmer shook his head and replied, "Some things you just can't explain." "So what happened that's so horrible?" the man asked as he sat down next to the farmer. "Well," the farmer said, "today I was sitting by my cow milking her. Just as I got the bucket full, she lifted her left leg and kicked over the bucket." "Okay," said the man, "but that's not so bad." "Some things you just can't explain," the farmer replied. "So what happened then?" the man asked. The farmer said, "I took her left leg and tied it to the post on the left." "And then?" the man asked. "Well, I sat down and continued to milk her. Just as I got the bucket full, she took her right leg and kicked the bucket." The man laughed and said, "Again?" The farmer replied, "Some things you just can't explain." "So what did you do then?" the man asked. "I took her right leg and tied it to the post on the right." "Yeah. And then?" "Well, I sat back down again and began milking her again. Just as I got the bucket full, the stupid cow knocked the bucket with her tail," the farmer replied. The man said and nodded his head. "Some things you just can't explain," the farmer said. "So what did you do?" the man asked. "Well, I did not have any more rope, so I took off my belt and tied the tail to the rafter. In that very moment, my pants fell down and my wife walked in. Some things you just can't explain. You can see the man can't explain to his wife why he has taken so long milking their cow, longer than usual. That's why she has come to check. He cannot explain why their cow has its two legs tied apart opposite each other. Not across, but one on one side and one on the other side, and the tail tied to the roof. And why he has his pants off. She is too embarrassed, confused, and in pain to even begin to ask all the questions she has. But she certainly has made some painful conclusions. Her husband was about to or has just finished having an intimate relationship with their cow. And possibly this is not the first time it is happening. This is according to her. He, on his part, is too embarrassed to explain to his wife as to what series of unfortunate coincidences led to that point. Taking alcohol, preferably alone, seems to be the only way out in what he cannot explain or begin to share with anyone, except this stranger who is ready to listen. To me, of course, it appears the man never intended and did not have an intimate relationship with their cow. He is only too embarrassed to talk about the perception. But increasingly, we in our generation, including the flames from the 70s, are dealing with the real things that have happened or are happening in our families that are too embarrassing to talk about. And that on account of choices our spouse or our child has made. And so we move on to part one to ask the questions. What are some of those situations that cause us to be too embarrassed to want to share with anyone? Let me begin with spouses. When your spouse becomes physically or emotionally abusive, and this could be either the wife or the husband, these days it goes either way. When all along the world thinks you have the ideal marriage and family. Or two, when you discover that your spouse now prefers a same-sex partner over their relationship with you. Three, when your spouse requests that they be allowed to remain in the marriage, but to retain a bisexual lifestyle, or to have or who have been already accidentally discovered being unfaithful with a same-sex partner. Sounds as tales from another land, but you may be surprised these are things that are right here with us. When you discover, number 5, that your husband is addicted to pornography. 6, when you begin to discover something unusual in your home, empty bottles of wine or beer, and some of them full, when all along you believed that your spouse was a teetotaler. 7, when you discover that dad and daughter have either a sexual attraction to each other or actually do have an active sexual relationship. Number 8, and finally, as an example of things that cause us to be too embarrassed, we don't know what to say to anybody. When you discover your spouse, especially a husband, has converted to another faith, or, and this is more usual than the earlier, converted to cultural teachings that now permit him to have more than one wife, and that prescribe a different way of how husbands and wives should relate to one another, not the biblical way that we have known. And he now strongly subscribes to FGM, including for you, his wife. What John Nganga has been moving about this country, talking about and writing about, finally has become a reality in our homes. So those are 8 examples that we can think about concerning choices that a spouse makes, puts us in a corner, and we get too embarrassed easily to never want to share. How about a child? When you have a child who is addicted to alcohol or to drugs, and these drugs could be prescribed by a doctor or they could be illegal drugs, and is already in a rehab or needs to be taken to a rehab, when your kid, and this may not apply so much to us as films from the 70s, but may more apply now to our grandchildren, when they ask that we buy them as they go back to school, sex toys. And I'm thinking of the constituency from which I come in central Kenya. There is one school in which 8 sex toys were discovered only in the last few weeks. Sex toys or sex machines in one girl's school. Some of them were bought by parents, some of them were rented. 3, when your child converts to another religion because he or she has fallen in love with a person from another faith, or because they want to try another faith, they no longer believe in your faith and my faith as their parents. 4, when your adult child announces they are no longer what you always believed and told them they are in terms of their gender. You give them a name you believed was right for their gender. You took them to schools you believed were appropriate for their gender. You protected them against persons you believe were dangerous to their gender. Because if they were girls, then boys were dangerous to them. If they were boys, then girls may have been dangerous to them. And now they are telling you, you were wrong all along. My birth certificate reads the wrong way. That they are LGBTQI+. I did a bit of trying to find what all these terms mean. I was shocked to find there are more terms than we ever can think of. L, we know it stands for lesbian. Usually refers to a woman who has a romantic and or sexual orientation towards other women. G for gay, used to represent men who are attracted to men in a romantic, erotic, and or emotional way. B for bisexual, a person who experiences sexual, romantic, physical, and or spiritual attraction to more than one gender. Not necessarily at and not at the same time or in the same way or the same degree. T for transgender, a person whose sense of personal identity or gender does not correspond to the sex they were assigned at birth, or does not conform to gender stereotypes. Sexual orientation varies and is not dependent on gender identity as we know them, male and female. Q has two meanings. One of them is questioning. An individual who is unsure of and or exploring their gender identity and or sexual orientation. But Q has a second meaning, queers. Those who identify as gender queer may identify as neither men nor women, may see themselves as outside of or between the gender binary. This gender binary meaning the two sexes that we usually categorize or labels we put, male and female. I meaning intersex, an umbrella term that describes people born with any of 30 different variations in sex characteristics related to chromosomes, testes in men and ovaries in women, which they are called gonads, sex hormones or genitals, and a plus at the end of LGBTQI. The plus means those 30 plus sexual orientations. And this is not talking about America. It's talking about here in Kenya and talking about even children of the flames from the 70s. Let's move on about the things that cause us to be a little challenged and find difficult to share. When your daughter or son serving with youth in different denominations, mainline or non-mainline, cannot or should not be trusted with youth of the same sex or with children of either gender. Incidentally, some of us may know, some of us may not know, but one of my heroes, John Ortberg, minister of a very large church in California, was recently forced out of ministry because one of his sons apparently had challenges with children, while the other, who blew the whistle, apparently considers himself gay. And John Ortberg was too embarrassed or too caring towards his children to share with the leadership regarding the problems his children were going through. Unfortunately, the problem still did blow up in an uncontrolled way to the heart of many in the church. And so he had to leave. When your child or grandchild is identified as a leader in the burning of a boarding school, reason they cannot wait until the end of term to go home and have sex with a boyfriend or boyfriends. Some of us may have seen this circulated. Some teachers overheard such a conversation, and some 3 girls were saying, we have to burn the school, we have to go home. Sexually, we can't last until the end of term. we have to go to half-term. We have to be sent home. When your daughter or son is so deeply addicted to pornography that going into marriage before help is sought will cause their future spouse to feel truly cheated for not having been made aware of the addiction before marriage happened. Or when your child proudly announces that the only way to get into a comfortable and successful life without having to struggle for years is to get married to this man who can give her a car, buy or build her a house right away, and maintain her well. The man already has one or two wives. Essentially, she has chosen more of a sponsor than a husband. And she is already pregnant with his child. When, God forbid, you lose your spouse, like some of us did at some point, at the appropriate time, you need to move on. Women, you are more able to hold. Men, we find it a little more difficult to survive in life without the support of a helper. And you know, and there are a number of pastors in this group this afternoon, that a neo queen deserves a neo palace. But you are grown up working children. Families say it is okay, go ahead. But it is you, not me or not us, to move out of this house. The house is ours. How do you share that? When you as an aging couple re-strategize over property that you bought, this is a new point. And you decide we are going to reinvest. We are going to sell what we have and reinvest it in a different way, appropriate for the years, our retirement years. But your grown-up, working children say, no way. This is part of our inheritance. We have plans over that property. We will not allow it. How do you begin to share about such a humiliating situation? And here, incidentally, we are not talking about property that is described as ancestral, that one got from your parents and your parents' parents and so on. We are talking about property that you have bought after working very hard, having left the university in the 70s. By God's grace, you have accumulated, and you are trying to find the best ways to use it in your latter years. Now, we can ask a question before we go to part 2 to ask, how do you deal with these feelings? But we could ask just a couple of questions. Why our spouse or our child would make such choices that cause us so much shame and embarrassment? The first, we could easily say we failed. As a wife, as a husband, as parents. And to some degree, that is what causes so much shame and embarrassment to us. Because it is possible we did contribute a small measure into what has happened to them. And the forwards that keep being passed in our networks don't help. They are very useful. And especially in this time of banning of schools, you find something like this. Parents who give their children everything they ask for, their children will grow up thinking they have a right to whatever they want. Parents who do not reprimand children for bad behavior, their children will grow up thinking that there are no rules in society. And you and I, we can begin to feel we can start to have a sense of guilt, because there is a measure to which these statements are very true. And a lot of what we are experiencing in society is what parents have failed to do. The reality, however, is that there are so many other forces competing against our best efforts. I can share 3 only. One is hormones. We do know, though, from those who are in the medical field, and people like Lillian, who are psychologists, I think it's real that all of us have hormones of the opposite gender. But for some, a man may have a greater than usual measure of the female hormone in them. And so he will get attracted to men instead of women. And the opposite is true. And this is what we call orientation. From a hormonal angle, you could be oriented towards your own apparent gender. Apparent meaning what we are supposed to be, whether it is man or woman, and we are attracted to our gender because our hormones of the opposite gender are higher. Therefore, we get attracted to what was supposed to be the opposite, but is the same now as us. Then there is socialization beside hormones, competing against us as parents. There are schools, there are birthday parties and weekend parties. There are phones and televisions. There are homes even where cousins, aunties, housekeepers and helpers are introducing our children to these alternative ways. And I know if I use that term alternative lifestyle, I could already in problem with some advocacy groups because they don't think it's alternative lifestyle. Governments, parliaments, and advocacy groups have done all possible to mainstream these lifestyles. But I propose to ask my brothers and sisters that there are also deep spiritual forces working against us. And this may be even bigger than the hormonal or the socialization. It's a falling away from God. When God and his written word cease to be taken as the authority in our choices, whether children or spouses, we are right at Romans chapter 1, where it is a slippery road right to the bottom. And that is why many of our struggling children, grandchildren, as well as our struggling spouses, find themselves. The word of God, and therefore the giver of that word, is no longer the supreme authority. When we read from John 1 to 14, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he came and lived amongst us. When we cast that off and want nothing to do with that living Word, Jesus Christ, and his written Word, then all we have left to deal with is our feelings and the culture that is around us and influencing us. And for that matter, our hormones. The words of Jesus ring so true in today's context. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life, and have life to the full. John 10:10. There have been some interesting social media scenes, and one of them many of you may have seen is one where there is this a little gazelle, young one, and the mother is looking from a distance. And this young one is sitting and approaching to where an enemy is. I think it's a cheetah. And what you see people writing, the comments are, we all know what the end will be. Others say, a grown-up decision indeed. Others, Mom sees danger when very far. In very rare occasions, we have seen lions taking care of orphaned gazelles, and finally such little creatures are rescued by the wildlife department. But this is a very rare occurrence. Usually, curiosity drawing anyone too close to the edge of the precipice almost invariably ends in death. And I don't want to say that our spouses and our children have taken a route of no return, but we need to be honest and say many of them are on a route of no return. Only God can rescue them. But I have encountered personally spouses who have come out, including spouses actually who have gone into the alternative lifestyle. I have personally encountered them. And with some interventions, they have been able to come out. But on the whole, the enemy comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. It is a slippery road fairly to the bottom of the ladder. And so we ask in part 2, how do we deal with the embarrassments and the shame that we go through? I have about 3 proposals. And the first one, and I believe highest on the ladder, is one that we find in Psalm 16, verse 8, loving God. I have set the Lord always before me, says David. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be ashamed. One Dallas Willard, commenting on this, says this: vision of God secures humility. Seeing God for who he is enables us to see ourselves for who we are. This makes us bold, For we see clearly what great good and great evil are at issue. And we see that it is not up to us to accomplish it, but up to God who is more than able. Therefore, we are delivered from pretending. We are delivered from being presumptuous about ourselves. We are delivered from pushing as if the outcome depended on us. We persist without frustration. We practice calm and joyful non-compliance with evil of any kind. So loving God is the first one, because if we ourselves are not standing right with God and have a living, throbbing relationship with God, we will actually not just be unable to share, we will crumble. And from a loving relationship with God, we are able to be lifted to a higher perspective to see things the way He would see them. And the next thing, therefore, that He gives to us is a loving relationship with those who are related to our spouses, children, loving those God loves the way He would. You see, one possibility we would have, or we would be tempted to, is to deny that these things are there. I remember at the church that I was pastoring for 25 years, we had a Catholic priest, a recovering alcoholic, who came to us and said, I have been in this problem and I have helped some situations by helping start an AA group, Alcoholics Anonymous, in a church context. I was excited. And I wanted us to begin an AA group at the Nairobi Baptist Church. But I read the mood of the leadership, and my chairman, I don't know whether it was at that time or a little earlier or a little later, Peter Kemoyo, professor, is here with us. And he knows the context that I was dealing with quite well. And I knew it was the wrong time to try to start an AA group at the church. And the general feeling is, what will people think when we start an AA group at a church? Are we saying our church is or has many people who are alcoholics when we want to create an image of very good people? I remember a little later we started a group of special singles. And those are women who are either separated or divorced. And it grew rather fast. And some people, including the leadership, were getting a little unsure that this was the right route to take. What will people say when we almost get to be associated as a church with many divorcees and separated? And so, because we are in a court of public opinion, so to say, one of the things that we are tempted to do is to deny these things exist. Another route that we can easily take is one of guilty. And we know with many road misdemeanors, or whatever you lawyers would call them, when you are taken to court without a good lawyer, you plead guilty to get out of it. And it's very easy for you and I to say, we are guilty. We are bad parents. We are bad wives and husbands. Indeed, we do know that those who abuse and those who go out of the marriage, we have had people who say, I went out of marriage because you let me out. Sorry, I think it's John Gunner's machine. Abute, I think. I think it's abute, yes. They turn to us and say, you are the one who caused me to go out of the marriage. You couldn't meet my needs, or were not willing to meet my needs, or you had diabetes, or you had high blood pressure and other things, so you couldn't meet my needs, so I was justified in going out. A third possible reaction is even hypocrisy. I remember when I came to Christ way back in 1965, the people who brought me up were the East African Revival Brethren. And what they used to do in the 50s and 60s, if a child was pregnant, or a son made somebody pregnant, not their own, because many of them were young then, they would not attend their wedding because those were weddings of sinners. But I saw them grow, their children grow, and their children became teenagers and then became young adults. And a number of their daughters got pregnant, and a number of their sons made girls pregnant. And what they did was completely to shift gears and fully support their children. So we can find ourselves in a situation where we either deny or too easily plead guilty, or live in a confused situation where we are sending double messages, which is called hypocrisy. I would say with our children, even in the court of public opinion, we need to ask, didn't Jesus love those who were in difficulties, who were on the periphery, tax collectors, prostitutes, commercial sex workers, Samaritans? He looked at them with love and compassion. Isn't it Jesus who gave us the example of the prodigal son? And the father allowed the son to make the painful choices of walking away with his inheritance. The prerogative was his. But when he came back, the father was waiting. I have recently been reflecting on God's love and the pain, and yet a never changing covenant with and for his people Israel. He calls Israel my son in Exodus 4:22 to 23, Jeremiah 31 to 20, Hosea 11:1. Is not Ephraim my dear son, the child in whom I delight? Though I often speak against him, I still remember him. Therefore my heart yearns for him. I have great compassion for him, declares the Lord. That's Jeremiah 31:20. Our relationship with our sons and daughters must remain unchanging, irrespective of how much pain and shame they may bring to us. But I think for a spouse, the thing is a little different. We may have the love of a lawyer or a judge. A spouse does not belong to us and bound to us the way a child is forever, like Israel is to their God. If a husband demands that we accept to live as a second wife, when we entered into a monogamous covenant or require us to go through FGM, we can opt to separate. If we find out that he is already unilaterally and fairly dishing out out to new families assets that we have built up together, we may want to protect our future and that of our children through seeking the services of a lawyer or the courts. As a spouse, you cannot take responsibility over the choices of another grown-up person. And 2 or 3, this is number 3. The first one was loving God. The second was loving as God loves. 3 is loving the way a lawyer or judge loves. And 4 is laughing and crying with a counselor. If we bottle everything up thinking we are strong enough to bear all on our own, we may find the Lord will break our back, literally and emotionally. We may wish to consider any of the following. Sharing about our child's sex orientation unless they deny us the permission to do so. Because if they deny us the permission, then we have no right to share with somebody. We will have betrayed them. Recognizing the futility to preach at them or to convert them. Only God can do that. They can know of our pain and our position as we understand the scriptures, but that may be all that we can do. Whether a child or a spouse, we can share with a trusted counselor or friend. We could share not so that they get confronted, but to provide ourselves with space to pour out so much that would otherwise kill us, literally or emotionally. And I truly thank the Flames from the 70s, the committee, for providing such a forum for us to be able to even dare talk about such a subject together. Conclusion. We will feel deep, excruciating pain at our core, almost like death has happened to a loved one. We will feel angry, betrayed, cheated. We will feel helpless, even hopeless. Some even wish a real death had happened because death is not simple at all than going through the experiences we are now facing. We must keep hoping and praying that the prodigal son or prodigal daughter or prodigal spouse will one day return home. We dare not kill hope. We must also accept and love those who cause us so much pain. They have made their choices, but only God can help them come out. John Nganga recently made a brilliant presentation on ministering to divorced persons within the church context. There is always a tension between remaining faithful to God's word on the one hand, hating what he hates, loving what he loves, and yet being and discharging our mandate of being a hospital to the sick, the wounded, and the hurting. And I close with something that I had said. Unless you and I are first of all standing because we truly love the Lord, and he is always at our right hand as David did experience, then we are not likely to be of use to anybody. I'll ask Rogers and Ruth, there is a song which is a parent's prayer by Karen McVeigh. If you are able to play it at this time, I'll be very grateful.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Ruth is going to play it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so very much.